Today, another attempt to launch Gemini 6 into orbit for a rendezvous in space. Now from the CBS News Space Center in New York, Walter Cronkite.
Good morning, everyone, and here we go again for another attempt to launch Gemini 6 with Navy Captain Walter Schirra and Air Force Major Tom Safford into orbit to meet rendezvous with, it is hoped, Gemini 7, now in its 11th day, nearing its 12th day on its 116th revolution of the Earth. Gemini 7 just passed over the Cape about a half hour ago for the last time before the trip when it expects to again see ignition and the blast off. Down after Cape Kennedy, the astronauts, Schirra and Safford, got into their spacecraft almost an hour and a half ago. They were buttoned up a half hour ago, and now the erector is being lowered for a launch at 8:37 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, an hour and 5 minutes from now. The count actually is T-minus 40 minutes and counting, but there is that 25-minute planned built-in hold at T-minus 3 minutes. In other words, the count goes down to 3 minutes before launch. That's 8:34, and then there will be a 25-minute hold. That's a pad built in case anything does go wrong down at the pad or with the spacecraft or the booster, so that perhaps they can get things straightened away before that critical moment when they must blast off if they are to make rendezvous. They can blast off later than the precise second at 8:37, but for every few seconds beyond that time, it delays their rendezvous for an orbit, and some 300 seconds of delay could mean an rendezvous only tomorrow instead of this afternoon at around 2:30 as planned. Let's go down to Cape Kennedy now and check in with our space expert on the scene, Chuck Von Frem. Chuck, how are things going?
Walter, as of now, things could not be going better. Gemini 6 has become known as a hard luck mission. Wally, Schirra, and Tom Safford have been trying to get off that pad out there we're looking at right now since last October, and during the night there was some fear the weather might turn up sloppy enough to cause still another postponement today. But when that dawn broke over the Cape, every observer's spirits just soared right out here at Press Site 2. It was one of those picture book sunrises this portion of the Florida coast justly brags about. It was just beautiful. There I go, using one of Wally Schirra's favorite words, just beautiful. And I bet Schirra said just that this morning when he saw the sunrise over the Cape. So weather is no longer a factor, at least at this moment. Everything appears go. As you mentioned, the erector came slowly down 9 minutes ahead of schedule. We're told on the CBS News Service wire that Wally Schirra reported to the blockhouse that he felt a quiver as the erector began coming down, but then he commented that he saw a whole bunch of blue up there, meaning the sky, and of course that made him happy. So the flight crew is now on its own out there with only the umbilical tower offering support and a couple of emergency wires they can ride to the ground in Hollywood style back to the Pad 19 complex should some catastrophic development occur. And of course they can always eject by parachute to safety, but this would so drastically alter the condition of the spacecraft that there'd be no chance for a Gemini 6 launch during the lifetime of Gemini 7 for a rendezvous effort. But right now, optimism is running very high here at the Cape, everything going very smoothly, and it seems now to be just a matter of watching and waiting. Walter?
Well, the possibilities for the launch of Gemini 6 in time for rendezvous, as of this morning, are still two windows this morning, the one opening at 8:37 a.m., a window meaning that little section of time during which a launch would still bring the Gemini 6 orbit into roughly the same path as the Gemini 7 orbit and permit that chase through the skies toward a meeting in space. There's a second window a little later on in the morning, although a little bit shorter than the first. There is one window then tomorrow morning, which would still get Gemini 6 up in time to meet Gemini 7 before its scheduled return to Earth on Saturday morning. And there is the possibility existing of extending Gemini 7's lifetime by 1 day to return on Sunday morning, so that they might still conceivably launch Gemini 6 in 2 windows that open on Saturday morning. This is the contingency planning in case this launch does not get off at 8:37 a.m. this morning as planned, just some 1 hour and 2 minutes from now. The count T-minus 36 minutes and 40 seconds counting, with a 25-minute built-in hold. One development in the last 24 hours, although actually the development has been going on for a week now in a slow fashion. After Gemini 7 circularized the orbit, that is, put the Gemini 7 spacecraft into a perfect circle around the Earth at 186 miles high, the orbit has been deteriorating somewhat, and now it is elliptical. It's 183 miles at its lowest point and 188 miles at its highest point. This is a 5-mile discrepancy and a 2 to 3 mile discrepancy over a perfect circular orbit. But they say at Houston that this is no problem, that this much discrepancy is acceptable, and that they still expect Schirra and Safford to be able to meet Borman and level, though the maneuvers may be slightly more difficult with an elliptical orbit even of this small discrepancy than a perfectly circular one. At the Cape, Schirra and Safford seemed to be in great spirits as they went out there to board their spacecraft this morning. The clearing weather must have lifted their spirits, as Chuck Van Fremd suggested a moment ago, since throughout the night there had been an overnight concern about ground fog this morning, and in the picture you can still see just a little of it there at the Cape. But it's not enough to give anybody any trouble now. It could have been serious if that ground fog had been clinging in there at launch time, or as they approach launch time. They've got to have visibility at least around the pad, if not in the skies above, although the stipulations are that they do not have more than about 4/10 cloud cover overhead, so that they've got good observation of the launch. All of that has been subject to real-time planning, as they say these days, meaning that it's extemporaneous somewhat. They don't go by the book like they used to in the early days of the Mercury program. A lot of confidence has come to the men at mission control and in the spacecraft itself. And when at the time of Mercury, where if anything went wrong, they wanted to be sure they had some very clear pictures of what went wrong over the pad. Today, they're a little more confident of their equipment, and they don't stick to the rule book quite as much. After their steak and eggs breakfast that the astronauts had this morning, as usual, Schirra and Safford made the trip to pad 16 to suit up, and then the familiar ride by van to pad 19. Where you see them here, debarking from that special truck of theirs, carrying their air conditioning equipment, with some handshakes from the boys at the pad. One of them said, last time, a reference, of course, to the fact that these men have twice before boarded this Gemini 6 spacecraft, once on October 25th, when the count was stopped at T-minus 42 minutes, when the Agena target vehicle they were going to chase, the unmanned vehicle that time, blew up before it got into orbit. And again last Sunday, when they themselves faced a terribly critical moment after the engine ignited and then was shut down. Wally Schirra there in the foreground tosses a package to one of the suit crew up in the White Room. We haven't heard what that little donation was. Tom Safford, 35-year-old, behind him there. These two Annapolis graduates about to go up and join another Annapolis man up there in Gemini 7. That's Jim Lovell. Frank Borman is a West Point man. They said they're going to go up there, these three Annapolis fellows, and hold a beat Army rally, outnumbering Frank Borman. The weather, of course, at the Cape is the first critical consideration, but the weather all around the world in the possible recovery zones is important as well. Mike Wallace can tell us how the weather is in other spots. Mike?
Walter, first of all, down at the Cape, the specifics, as we heard from Chuck Von Frem, things are in first-rate shape. It's partly cloudy with light winds, the temperature in the 60s, and the forecast for launch with light variable winds sees only 2 feet high down there, visibility 5 miles now, and ground fog and haze with a high, thin, broken deck of clouds, the possibility of some clouds at 500 feet. At the Wasp, in the primary recovery area, in case of launch abort here, the visibility right now is 10 miles, the wind at 6 knots, and the waves at only 2 feet. Then, south of the Cape Verde Islands here, on the possibility of first time around, if anything went wrong and the boys had to be recovered, the weather is good. Then around on the other side, in the other secondary recovery areas, 700 miles southeast of Tokyo, weather is good. 800 miles northeast of Honolulu, weather is good. Let's take a look now on our standard Colesman map at the way these two spacecraft will be playing hide and seek with each other of a sort, at least for the first 4 orbits. Here comes the GT-7 on its projected route across the United States just before the takeoff of GT-6. It will be 1,200 miles ahead, as you can see, when the GT-6 gets up. And for most of the first orbit, Schirra and Safford will be about 1,200 miles behind. Then as they come into the second orbit, they fire their thrusters, and by the time that they are in the middle of that second revolution, they'll be something between 500 and 600 miles behind. They continue this way to the end of the second revolution. By the time that they get to the middle of their third revolution, for their rendezvous, they'll be only about 160 miles behind, and now they are pulling even, as you can see. And it will be in the middle of the 4th orbit, in the middle of the 4th revolution, over the Mariana Islands, actually over the island of Guam, that the rendezvous will take place, and then for 6 hours, GT-6 and GT-7 will be taking a look at one another, hopefully almost eyeball to eyeball. GT-6, GT-7, third time, and this is it for sure, Walter.